All right, we're nearly to the end. We're actually to the fun part now, which is compositing. This is where we're going to start compositing different views or different renders of this scene, and we're going to merge them together for the final output. So before we get to that, let's go back over to the layout workspace and just have a look around at what we have. I'm going to turn off this icosphere from the viewport and the outliner. In fact, let's rename this to something better than icosphere, maybe fog is better. And just let's have a look around at what we have so far. So we have a bunch of buildings and a whole planet that we worked really hard to generate procedurally. We have a sun casting some light. We have a camera defining our view. And we have what we just turned off, a fog icosphere that's creating kind of like a foggy ambience for us. Look back through the camera. Depending on what you have, you might want to make some tweaks to the size of the buildings or the distribution or their heights or whatever. You can go ahead and do that. And really, I encourage you to. That's why we did this procedurally, to have some fun with that. And I might go back and tweak some things later, like the shading and stuff. But for now, I want to organize this Blender file and prepare it for compositing, which we don't necessarily have to do. But if we just fire off a quick render with F12 and see what we have, this is kind of where we're at, which is not, it's not bad. It looks okay. Probably some more tweaking with the emission shaders and stuff to kind of make it look a little bit better, but it's fine. But I don't want to stop here. I want to use the power of compositing to really make this thing kind of punch through the fog and really give it more of a kind of cyberpunky dystopian vibe. And I think the only way to really do that is with a little bit of compositing. And if you haven't used a mist pass, I'm going to introduce you to that right now. It's a little bit of a secret weapon. It really makes compositing powerful. But I want to take a few minutes to organize the Blender file and create some different scenes or different kind of layers of this compositing sandwich that we're going to use to create the final scene. And just to describe what we're going to do, there's going to be a few layers that we need to create. The first one is going to be a background layer, which is just this black kind of star field that we generated with that Voronoi texture. Just a black background with our star field. And then on top of that one, we're going to put in the planet with the buildings and basically what we're looking at right now in the viewport. So we'll render that. And then on top of that one, we're going to put in a fog layer. And then to make these really interact in interesting ways, we're going to generate a mist pass, which is kind of a special layer of data, which defines how near or far away things are in in sort of a depth field. And that's going to be really what makes this whole thing interesting. But in order to create these separate renders, we need to create different scenes. So this will be a scene, this will be a scene, and this one will be the mist pass will be its own generated layer of data, which doesn't really require its own scene, but we definitely need these three to be separate so we can have three distinct and discrete renders in which to merge together. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this drawing and let's create those three scenes that we know we're going to need. And the first one is really what we're looking at. So let's name this, let's number them so they kind of appear in order. So let's name this one planet. So we have, let's look through rendered view. Okay, to make things a little bit easier to look at, I'm going to use Control B and just draw a box around the border of the camera. That's going to just kind of confine the preview render to the dimensions of the camera. Now, I don't want this background with the stars in this, in this scene. I just want the planet. So in order to do that, we need to go in our render properties down to this film section and check transparent. Okay, that's going to turn off the background, and we can get that back by creating another scene. And we're going to use this button right here to create a linked copy of this scene. And what linked copy is it's going to generate a new discrete scene for us to work with, but all the objects in that scene are actually going to be the same objects. The data is going to be the same. So if we change something about an object in one scene, it's going to automatically propagate to any other scenes that use that object. So let's use linked copy, and let's name this to background. And in this one, let's disable the environment. Let's disable the fog. Let's disable the main scene, and let's uncheck transparent. So now all we have is the star field, and I can see we're going to have to add a little bit more stars to this thing. It's a little bit boring. We'll get to that. So now we have two scenes. One is planet, and then the other one is background. Let's go back to planet. Let's look through the camera. Okay, and then the final scene that we need is one with just the fog. So let's use that button again to create a linked copy. Let's rename this 3 fog and uncheck environment, uncheck main scene, and all we have is fog, and we can bring that back in the viewport with this eye icon. So that's just the fog now. Okay, so let's quickly review. We have the planet layer and the background layer and fog. So those are the 3 renders that we're going to be using. And now we're ready finally to generate this mist pass that I've been talking about. Let's go into solid viewport shading to do this. Now there's a few steps we need to take to make this possible. The first is in the view layer properties tab right here. And let's find under data passes, there's this item called mist. Let's check that. And then let's go into the camera settings. Let's select that in the outliner. Select our camera, go to the camera settings tab, and under viewport display, check on mist. So now if we zoom out here, we see that we have this line kind of shooting out from the camera. And this line indicates the start point and the depth of the mist. So at this point, it's going to be pretty transparent. And as you increase in the depth away from the camera, the thicker and thicker this fog is going to get until we get to this point where things are completely opaque. All right, so this will make sense in a moment. But what we need to do is adjust this line so it starts kind of right here and it kind of goes into the planet a little bit like that. So to do that, go over to the world settings, and in this section called Mist Pass, we have control over the start and depth values. Now, depending where your camera is, these values might look different for you, but I'm going to adjust mine. So the start point is somewhere right around the top of the buildings, something like that. And I'm going to turn on X-ray mode so we can see exactly where this line is intersecting the planet. And in the depth value, I'm going to decrease this so it ends right around the center of the planet, like that. So let's look around. So this is basically what we have for the mist start point and depth. So the camera's looking into the scene like this, and then things are going to start to get misty right about here. And then as we move further and further away from the camera, things are going to get mistier and mistier and foggier and thicker until they get to the end point, and things are going to be completely opaque. You're not going to see anything past this point because it's going to be totally opaque. All right. Okay, so let's look through the camera with 0 on the numpad. And for this planet scene, so we have planet, background, and fog. For planet, I don't want fog to be showing, so I'm going to uncheck that collection. So only environment and main scene should be visible. I'm just going to double check the other ones. So background should have nothing, and fog should have only the fog. Okay, so that's good. Let's go back to planet, look through the camera again with 0 on the numpad, and then fire off a render with F12. Okay, and we can escape out of that. Now follow me over to the compositing workspace, and this is where we're going to be able to see some of our efforts kind of play out. And just like previewing any other node, we can do that in the compositor with Control-Shift-Click. Let's click on the render layers node here, and then if you notice that added a viewer node, just like in geometry nodes, there's a viewer node in the compositor, but it's super huge and it's right in the middle, and we can change that by going to view and hit move, and we can now move this thing off to the side a little bit, and we can take the zoom down, something like that. Let's move it over a little bit more. Okay, so this is just the planet scene. And there's different scenes in here, just like the ones that we prepared, planet, background, and fog. And we'll look at those in a minute. But notice that in the render layers output, there's a mist item. So if we do Control Shift click, click, click again and get down to mist, we can see exactly what that produced. Pretty cool, right? It shows basically a depth map of what's near to the camera. So these darker items are very near to the camera, or where we said to start the mist pass. And then as we go further out, these buildings in the background are going to fade off into the distance. That's just exactly what we want. Okay, let's start putting this composite together. Let's go back to our render layers. Let's Control Shift click to get back to the image. So we have this viewer. And let me put this composite way at the end. This is going to be the final output. So we eventually want all our nodes to be basically feeding this final composite output. We can duplicate this render layers with Shift D. Let's bring that one down, and let's change this to background. And we can preview that. And we're not going to see anything yet because we haven't technically rendered that as of yet. Any scenes that we specify in other render layers nodes, once we do that and we render another image, it's going to notice that, hey, we want this one. You're asking for this scene, so let's render it. So if we do another F12 and render, let's escape back to our compositing. And now if we preview this one, we can see our star field. I'll add more stars later, but the first thing I want to do is merge these together. And I can do that with a alpha over node. I'm going to place that over here. And I'm going to send in the image of the background into this top slot and the image output of the planet render into the bottom one. Let's preview this. And now we see those merged. But we have another scene called fog. So let's add that in here. Let's duplicate this render layers down here. And you know what? Let's move the background to the bottom. Let's set this one to fog. Okay, let's fire off another render. Okay, let's go back to the compositor. And now we should, if we Control Shift click this render layer, we should see the fog, which we do. Okay, awesome. Oops, you know what? We forgot to send in the result of this alpha over into the composite. Remember, this is the final render, what we're actually going to see. And if we preview this alpha over, we can see that they are the same. And now here's where we're going to get a little creative with the mist pass. So let's preview that again by clicking, Control Shift clicking down till we see mist. And I want to multiply this with this render layers pass here. And I want to mix these together with a mix node. We can set this to multiply. I'm going to send in the mist here and the fog layer there. Let's preview this. And that looks pretty good. And I may want to adjust the intensity of this part of the composite. And I can do that easily with a math node and just set this to multiply, throw that in there. Now if we preview this, I kind of now have control of the intensity. I can turn this way down if I want to, or just keep it at 1. And next I'm going to remap colors to be more bluish. And the go-to node for that is the color ramp. I'm going to throw that in here and set this white color stop to something like that. And now I want to mix the two of these images. So the image that we're currently looking at, which is this multiplication, this merging of the mist pass and the fog, and I want to mix that in with the original image of the planet. So I'm going to add in with Shift A another mix node, drop that right in here to catch the image output. And I want to mix that together with what we're looking at right now. Let's preview this. And the factor is set to 1, so it's taking 100% of this input. We want to just ease that back a little bit, something around here maybe. But again, totally subjective, whatever you think is looking good. Okay, and now let's move further along this process and preview the alpha over and see what we get as an end result. This is starting to look a little bit more cyberpunky now, yeah? I can see a couple things we need to fix. First, we don't have any rain. We forgot to enable that in the render. So let's go back and make sure that we're in our planet scene, which we are. Let's bring back the rain. And the other thing is that the emission of the lights they're just not intense enough. So I'm going to go back to shading. I'm going to use our shader placeholder, look at the buildings small, and I'm going to bump this emission up even further, something like 70. Just make sure those are really popping out. Let's go back to compositing. Let's do one more render. Okay, we're getting there. And from here on out, it's really a matter of tweaking things to get things to look better, changing a value here, adjusting a parameter there, and really just kind of composing the scene, just dialing things in to where you like it. And there's a few things I know I want to do. I want to change the rain. It doesn't really quite do it for me. The size of the buildings I want to adjust. I want to add a little bit of fog glow to the emission lights. And I want to add some more stars in the background, just stuff like that. So I'm going to do a little bit of adjusting, and then I'm going to show you one trick so you can recompose the scene and move the camera around and things will still look good, okay? So I'm going to go back over to geometry nodes, and I'm going to turn off the rain just for a second. Okay, so let's bring back our geometry nodes. And in the big buildings, I want the big buildings to be a little bit bigger still. So I think I'm going to change the X and Y start value to 1, so they're all a little bit thicker now. I'm going to increase the max value of the X and Y to something like maybe 1.4, something like that, just so they're a little chunkier. And I want to work on that rain just a little bit more. I'm going to bring that back into the viewport. Just going to select the rain object. And if you click an object that you know there is geometry nodes attached to, and you don't see anything, it's probably somewhere off of the viewport somewhere. You have to kind of scroll around to find it. It's really hard to do sometimes. One little hack is while you're hovering over the geometry node space, if you press the A key and then the period key on your numpad, it'll bring them all into view. So A selects all the nodes, and the period key brings those nodes into view, or whatever you have selected, it centers it in that work area. So just a little trick. Okay, back to adjusting things. I think the panels here are a little bit too thick, so I'm going to take the grid Y size down to just maybe 1. I think that's going to look a little bit better. And for the range shaders, let's go to that workspace. Look in rendered view, and I'm going to use my little shader placeholder object to bring back the shader nodes, and I'm going to change that to rain so I can work with that directly. And if you can notice here, these rain streaks here are kind of dark and in shadow, and these are being illuminated by the sun, which is kind of coming from this angle up here. I don't really think that's a good look in the final composite, so I'm going to change out this principled BSDF. I'm going to take that out, and in its place, I'm going to add in an emission shader. I'm going to hook that up to where the principled BSDF used to be. Now this is really intense, so I want to change this strength to maybe 0.3, something in there. And I'm going to change the color a little bit to something kind of blue. And finally, the streaks are a little bit too long. It's not really looking like rainfall to me. So in this block texture, this is where we break things up. Remember, if we preview this, we can get that block texture. And I think I want to increase that threshold a little bit, or decrease it rather. I want to decrease this so there's a little bit more black. So I'm breaking it up more. So something around 0.4 might do it. Let's go back and preview the final mix shader. Yeah, I think that's going to be a little bit better for us. So that should be all the tweaks necessary for the rain. And now the background star field. For that, I'm going to change my scene over to background, and I'm going to hit 0 on the numpad to see exactly what's being rendered. That's not enough stars. So to get to the world settings, I need to access that up here from this dropdown. I think the problem is probably to do with the scale of the Voronoi texture. I think I'm going to increase this to something like 35. Okay, that looks a little bit better. And let's see if we can make some adjustments to the ramp. No, that should be okay. Maybe a little bit more on the scale, 40. Something like that ought to do, just so we have a little bit more stars in the star field background. All right, let's head back over to the compositor, switch the scene to planet, and then let's do one more render with F12. Okay, and we can escape back to our compositing nodes, and this is getting there. I'm happy with the changes with the rain in particular. I think that looks a little bit better. You might even want to punch it up a little bit more still. But I think the last part that's really kind of keeping this from really being cyberpunky and dystopian is that the emission lighting doesn't really have enough glowing or fog glow or blooming effect. And when I think of cyberpunk scenes, I always think of that kind of lighting effect. So I want to add that in here. And there's a great node for that. It's called the glare node. So drop that in here. It defaults to streaks, but we want fog glow. And I'm going to show you what this does. I'm going to branch off another noodle off of the image from the render layers on our planet scene. Drop that into glare. I'm going to Control Shift click the glare and then shift this mix to the right. Just increase that value to, I guess let's just make it 1. So now you can see that anywhere there's emission lighting, it's really going to make those kind of punch through. I'm going to increase the size of that a little bit, maybe threshold of 0.1. So they really start to pop through. Now I want to mix this in to the image before we get to the alpha over where we put the background in. So let's add in another mix and let's set this one to add, and let's add in the result of that fog glow. And then let's preview this alpha over and see what we get. Yeah, that's looking a lot better, and we can adjust how much of this we want. I think I want quite a lot of it actually. It's a pretty cool effect. And if you mute this node here, just hit M to mute that, you can really see the effect is pretty dramatic. Really like that. Okay, and the final tweak I think I'm going to make is to the windows of the buildings. They're just a bit too bright. Not really loving that. So I'm going to go back to the shading workspace, change from world to object, select shader placeholder, little utility object that we use for shading, change that material to building big, and let's look in rendered view in the 3D viewport. And let's see, let's go into our windows group, and right here I labeled this node window light strength so I remember what that does. I'm just going to bring this final color stop down a little bit less than that, something around in here. Okay, let's go to compositing, do another render. And that should do it. And in the streaks part, I think I want these streaks a little bit longer than they are. I'm going to hide the rain in the outliner just for a second. And let's see, where are our streaks? Okay, this is the area where I think we break up the streaks. I'm just going to preview this color ramp. Yep, that's it. So I'm going to bring this white stop just a little bit in. Let's preview this multiply here. Okay, let's bring this stop a little bit in here to intensify those streaks a little bit. Let's see what this final multiply looks like. I changed some values in the wave texture just a little bit so we get a little bit less streaks. I think that is about what I'm looking for. Let's maybe tweak scale on the Voronoi texture again. All right, let's give that a shot. Hook up our final mix shader to the material output, go back to compositing, another render. Okay, I think we're pretty much getting there. Now I want to show you that trick that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Follow me on over to the layout workspace, and remember when we added that mist pass, we had to set the start point and the depth of that mist pass according to where the camera is. Now, if I change the camera position, now that screws up the mist pass start point and depth, and the compositing is going to get all screwed up, and we don't want that. So how do we change the composition or change the camera view without screwing up the mist pass? The answer is to use a driver. You might have heard of drivers before, and they're super powerful. This is a great moment to use a driver to position the start point of this mist pass no matter where we position the camera, okay? So we just need to set up a little bit of a mathematical expression. It's not going to be complicated, but let's just take a look at what we need. I'm going to go back into X-ray mode with Alt-Z. we want the mist pass to start just at the top end of the buildings, and we want it to go just past the center point of the planet. And if we move the camera around, and that's going to move with it, we don't want that. So we want this start point to maintain its position relative to the surface of this planet. Well, one way to express that is the distance of the camera to the origin of the planet minus some distance, okay? And this distance is always going to be the same. So all we need to really do is retrieve the position of the camera, or just get the distance of the camera to this object. And we can do that with drivers. I'm going to get out of X-ray mode now and go to the World Settings tab. So this start point is what we want to introduce a driver to. And to add a driver to any field, we can right-click on the value, and we want to say Add Driver. That's going to bring up this panel. And it looks a little complicated, but all we want to do is right down here where it says xvar, change this to distance, and it's going to give us an opportunity to specify which two objects we want to calculate the distance between. And the first object is going to be the camera. Let's type in camera, select that, and in the second variable, we're going to select planet. So now this var, it's a variable called var, that's going to store the distance between the camera and the planet. Now notice that the start point of this mist moved way over here. We need to bring this way back to where it was. So let's right click and edit driver. And we need to edit this expression. Right now it's taking that distance, which is stored in var, and it's adding 29 meters to it for some reason. We just need to bring this back to subtract something like 7 meters or something. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to be. Let's go to X-ray mode again. Let's edit the driver. I think this might be like maybe 15 meters or 12, something in there. 13, looks good. So that's about where it was before. So now if we move this camera, it's going to maintain that same mist start point and depth, which is really nice because now we can look through the camera with 0. On the numpad, I'm going to get out of X-ray mode. And remember this camera to view trick. If I click that, now I can move about this scene, maybe get a different composition or different angle on things that I like, maybe even move in a little bit, something like this. Let's do another render and go over to the compositing workspace. And if we preview the mist by Control-Shift, click, 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 click again, we get the same depth profile that we had before. Pretty cool. I'm going to send our preview back to this final alpha over node. So you can go ahead and really just compose whatever kind of angle you like, or what's, what looks good to you. I'm going to do something maybe like that. I still want the sun. I still want my sun to be casting kind of a angled ray of light on the whole scene. But this really gives freedom to compose the shot kind of how you want. And of course, it's going to uncheck this camera to view. Of course, you can go back to geometry nodes and really just mess with all of this that you want and create different configurations, whatever you think is cool. I'm going to go look from the camera again. Wow, that's interesting. Let's see what that looks like. Pretty cool. I think I like that one. So really just have fun with it, change values, experiment with random seeds, just change things up and change colors, change building shapes, whatever you want to make something cool that you like. And if you want, show me what you did, or you know what? Hey, if you made it this far in this video to the end, give me like a rocket ship emoji or something in comments. That way I can kind of have fun and see who actually made it to the end of this several part tutorial. So that's it for me. I hope you have fun with this. Show me what you've created, and I'll see you in the next tutorial, whenever that might be. Take care, everybody.